we're just glad that you're joining us. We're glad that we can hear you. We're going to do an audio, and we can post it somewhere, and whatever, and certainly it'll be on the radio, too.
Yeah, well, they did that one time with Channel 2 when I had my old computer.
Sure.
They just showed me a still photo, and they just had my voice.
Okay, so anyway,
Right.
we do want to get started because we also have another show we're doing after this one.
Yes,
So,
all right. I'm sorry.
That's all right. So are you ready? You're good to go?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, and everyone else? Okay.
Okay, is the timer set to 59:59?
Yes, it is.
Okay, hit the start button on the timer. Put the clapper in front of your face. When you hit the clapper, you're on the air.
Right. Welcome to Talking Peace, being recorded here at Think Twice Radio in the home of the future. Thanks to our friend and producer, Richard Wicca. Thanks, Richard. And we're very excited always to be part of WBNY, to be streaming and broadcasting on WBNY 91.3 FM at Buffalo's original alternative radio station with our dear friends at Buff State. So thank you for that. I always like to remember in Talking Peace that we are talking peace here on Haudenosaunee land stolen from the Haudenosaunee, from the Seneca in particular. I think for all of the people on the show here today, and for some of you listening out there, many of you will be on Haudenosaunee and Seneca land. And also to remember, as we remember our indigenous brothers and sisters, how they always start with Thanksgiving, of giving thanks for Mother Earth and for all the creatures and all the elements, all the plants, and all the leaders really that help us to try and to acknowledge them all and to thank them all and to try and live as originally instructed so that life can continue in this creation. So our topic tonight is a very special one, and it is the 1619 Project. And we'll be talking about the history, and especially the history of Black people in this country. I should say I'm Vicki Ross. I'm the Community Coordinator at the Western New York Peace Center, and we have here always blessed and grateful to have the Executive Director of the Western New York Peace Center, Deidra EmEl. Hi, Deidra.
Oh, hello.
And then also our very special guest who knows all about the 1619 Project and even more about keeping our eye on history from just decades and scores of years of doing that, keeping our eyes on history, thanks to Dr. Eva Doyle. Hi, Dr. Doyle. Hi.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here. And thank you for your invitation to speak this evening.
Oh, well, we're so thrilled to have you with us because we know you have not only your eye on history, but the key to so many of the things that we're trying to learn, including from the 1619 Project. We'd had, a lot of similar points to make. So it's just great having you on. So one thing we like to do before we get started, or as we get started, is to just sort of think about what are the values that we think of with this topic, the values that we want to uphold in this conversation. And I'm going to ask Deidra to go first, if you would, Deidra, and then Dr. Doyle, and then I might have a couple. So one or two,
sure.
Yeah. Values.
I think open-mindedness and consistency. Open-mindedness and consistency. A lot of times, truths and facts and history comes out, and we acknowledge it as such, and we accept it. But then nothing happens. It's not followed through on. So I'm hoping that, even after this discussion, it's continued to be encouraged for us to find the truth, to encourage, this idea of the updates of our curriculums, and to be open-minded to seeing the whole picture and not just from a small lens. So, yeah.
Right. Well, thank you. So, open-mindedness, consistency, yeah, those are both excellent. So we'll definitely want to be emulating all of that now and later too. So, and Dr. Doyle, what would you say for a couple values that are dear to your heart, or particularly you think of in this conversation?
Yes, and thank you. I just want some members of the audience may not be aware that I am a retired Buffalo Public School teacher.
Oh, sure.
Yes, I spent 30 years teaching in the Buffalo Public Schools. I have been retired going on 18 years.
So
and when I was in the school system, I was known for two things. Teaching African American history all year long, from September to June, not just in February. And I'm glad that is it Deidra?
Yes.
Spoke of consistency. As a matter of fact, that word consistency has been my middle name.
Oh boy,
I know.
It's been my middle name because I have been writing the column Eye on History, and I'm very excited about this because this month is the 43rd year anniversary of me writing that column Eye on History for 43 years without interruption. And I feel like you talk about consistency. I think that's that's almost kind of consistency. And I'm glad you mentioned, I think you mentioned the word truth, because my goal, and the way I describe the column is the only weekly consistent column on African American history in Western New York, finding the truth of our history. You know, the Buffalo News, several years ago, the Buffalo News did a full-page story about my life, my writing, and all that. And I was surprised. I didn't know they were paying attention. I was surprised that the subtitle was describing me as the truth teller. That was a surprise.
That is good. You're making me want to resubscribe to the Buffalo News.
Yeah, well, you know what? I write for the oldest Black newspaper in Western New York, the Criterion, which is 97 years old.
Wow.
And I started with the Challenger, but I have been with the Criterion for the remainder of the time. And so when I write those columns, Eye on History, I'm always telling the truth of history when it comes to African and African American people. That's not my number one goal. That's why when I was reading over the 1619 project as started, and she's going to be a guest at the UB speakers, Dr. Nikole Hannah-Jones, and doing her project. You know, I read the whole thing over, and I said to myself, there's been so much controversy. There's been so much rejection of what she has done. But, you know, she was telling the truth.
Right. Absolutely.
She was telling the truth. I think people don't want to accept truth. I think this is a major problem. People are uncomfortable when we're dealing with truth. And you mentioned, I think you mentioned Native Americans, Vicki. I think I heard you say something about Native Americans.
Yep. I heard
this country is not only African Americans and their contributions and their experience in America. People don't want to accept Native Americans. You know, one of the things, I was known for a whole bunch of stuff. And if I start talking about it, we'll be here until 10, 11 o'clock. But every year, in my classroom, I had the majority of students were African American, but I also had Native American students.
Sure.
I had Hispanic students.
Mm-hmm.
I had handicapped students. And one year, I had a totally blind student.
Mm-hmm.
And when the principal came to me and said, I want this student to be in your classroom, and she is totally blind, I didn't know how to do it, how to handle. I was not trained.
Mm-hmm.
I was not trained. Well, what I did, because she came
Mm-hmm.
with her Braille machine, and she came with a full-time aide,
Mm-hmm.
I had to teach myself
Right.
how to teach this student. Her name was Annie. Annie's probably about 40 years old, maybe 45 years old now. I'm telling my age. So I had to stop talking so fast when I was in front of the classroom. I had to slow down.
Sure.
I had to be aware of Annie's needs. I had to be sensitive to her.
Right.
And you know what? Annie, although she was blind, she was a straight A student.
Sure.
A straight A student.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying that to say this. Especially if you're teaching and you're an educator, you have to be sensitive to all of the students in your classroom.
Absolutely.
No matter what background.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Native, Hispanic, Jewish, whatever. You have to be sensitive to them and their culture, their history, their traditions, where they came from. I remember one year in November, we were observing Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. And I wanted my students to understand Thanksgiving not from the European perspective, right. But mm-hmm. from the Native American perspective. So I invited a Native American storyteller mm-hmm. to come to my school, which is Campus West. I taught at Campus West for the last 25 years of my career. Mm-hmm. And she came in, I set it up, got permission from the principal. She spoke in the auditorium. Mm. She had a table full of artifacts from the Native American community. She did storytelling. She talked about Thanksgiving from the Native American perspective. Mm-hmm. Because I think the best person to talk about their culture and their history is the person from that community.
Absolutely.
I couldn't do it. I knew from what I read in the books, but I wanted a living example. Right. Of someone to come in and to talk to the students. So I really appreciate what Dr. Nikole Hannah-Jones did in writing out and presenting the 1619 project. And for all these people who are rejecting it or finding it controversial or being negative, they really reread it again and think about what she said, because she told the truth.
Right.
She told the truth. And a lot of people can't handle the truth.
Well, those are such important. Well, first of all, thank you for all of that. It's just so wonderful what you've been doing and managed to do all these many, many years serving the students and the entire community. So we couldn't be more grateful for you and for all your truth-telling. So that truth-telling and that having people tell their own story and that courage that it takes to really, really push to make sure that other people are, the values I usually pull out are truth and love, because I think of Dr. King and unarmed truth and unconditional love that is needed, and that's a love for our people, love for the truth, love for the history, and the love that makes us. That's where the real activism comes out of that love.
Yes, that's true. I'm a little sad this evening because when I was preparing for this presentation, and I've been speaking all over the place. Right. So I said, I had to take a little break. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'd fix a cup of coffee, took a break, and then I turned on the news. Right. And my heart sank.
I know.
Because of this. Yeah, the shootings at McKinley.
We'll talk about it. Yeah, well, I thought we'd talk about that too.
Because, but I want to kind of, when you mentioned love, I want to bring this in there because when I went to the celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King at the Kleinhans Music Hall on the 16th of January, the theme was love. The theme was love.
I was there too.
Believe, yes, I believe very strongly, Vicki, that that's lost in our society. People don't love one another.
Well, some of
They
us
don't.
do. Yeah.
Well, no,
Right.
I shouldn't have said it like that.
Right. Some
I
of us
didn't mean
do.
in
But
the general.
right.
Many of us do love, but we do have some people that don't,
Right.
and that makes it easy for them to attack other people. That makes it easy for them to pick up a gun and shoot and kill without thinking, because they don't have that love. And I think that's so important.
Right.
And the understanding, coming to people who may be different, who may come from a different culture,
Right.
a different background. We have to begin to understand other people and communicate. We don't communicate.
Right.
And I think it's been especially hard this past year
Right.
because of the pandemic. We're going on 2 years because of the pandemic, because people have not been in close proximity with one another. They have not been able to share. People have been isolated, and we're just beginning to get back on track. So I think that's a big part of it, but it's so important. And we have a lot of examples in our history, in African American history. We have a lot of examples.
Yes.
Talking about developing peace, looking for. Although we've had violence, and we not only have had violence, say between Black people, on each other, but we suffered violence from the past.
Oh God, sure.
From I just did an article. I've been writing for the Buffalo News every Sunday. I know you all don't subscribe to it.
Well,
but
I have right up until yesterday. Anyway.
Anyway, now I've been writing the column for 43 years, but for the last 12 years, the Buffalo News has published my column Eye on History every Sunday.
Well, that's
so I wrote about a lady. Her name was Eunice Carter. That was my first article, and Eunice was the first African American prosecutor in the history of New York State back in the 1930s. And she was famous because she helped to take down the most notorious mob boss in New York City, Lucky Luciano. She took him down.
Wow.
She was the one to put together the facts. But her story, she made a big change in her life because she had a lifelong friend named Tom Moss. And they grew up together, played together, shared together. And then she found out that he had been lynched by a white mob simply because he was a successful businessman.
Wow.
He and two other friends put their resources together and bought a store called the People's Grocery. Right across the street was a white-owned store. So what happened was, and to make a long story short, the Black community started to patronize him.
Right.
Because he had his prices were fair.
Sure.
They got better treatment. So anyway, when they started to patronize him, the whites got angry and they broke into the store, tore up the store, dragged him out, arrested him, and then later on, he was found lynched along with his two other friends. That was the hatred and the resentment of a Black person being successful. Now, you could go all through history, and you can find a saying. I mean, look what happened in Tulsa. Look what happened in Rosewood, Florida. The same kind of thing happened over and over again. And Dr. Nikole Hannah-Jones, she speaks about those atrocities.
Right. Sure.
In her, and so when people read that, they feel uncomfortable. Sometimes they may even feel guilty. But it's the truth of the history. It's the truth of some of the things that have happened to African Americans. Not only African Americans, but if you look at the history of Native Americans and how their land was taken from them and they were pushed off their land. And just recently, they talked about the schools, the Native American schools, and how those schools, they were robbed of their history, they were robbed of their culture, they could not speak their language, their hair was cut, and they were just mistreated.
And lots of them died.
Sometimes,
so many died.
A lot of them died. A lot of them died, but history, sometimes it can be painful. But
Absolutely.
sometimes, in order to face what's happened in this country, we have to go through that painful process. If you
Right.
remember in South Africa, when the blacks were fighting
Right.
apartheid,
Mm-hmm.
and Nelson Mandela went to prison for all those years,
Right.
and we lost the Honorable Bishop Tutu,
Right.
who spoke out against
Yes.
apartheid. Well,
Bishop Tutu.
one of the things that
Mm-hmm.
happened when Mandela was freed, they had what was called a truth
Right.
and reconciliation
Right.
conference to
Mm.
bring together the whites and the blacks and to really talk about the things that had happened and to face the truth. And
Right.
that was a
Mm-hmm.
healing process.
Right.
So sometimes, I know I'm talking a whole lot, so I got to give you time to say something. But I get excited because
Right.
this is, you know what, this is my life's
Right.
work.
Right.
When I read about when I read it twice, when I read the essay
Mm-hmm.
written by Dr. Hannah Jones,
Yes.
I recognized a lot of the work that I'm doing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
A
because it's
lot
the
of the work.
facts of the history. It's the facts of the history. That's it.
Yes,
And the
yes.
clarity also.
The clarity.
One of the things that I thought was so big. Well, first of all, I love what you're saying about we know that dealing with the past, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. So, and that we have the legacy is we see it in what's happening today in all kinds of
Yes,
ways. But one of the things that, I mean, that gets ignored too, that I feel like, as she said, the economic engine that is the
yes.
United States, where the United
Mhm.
States became the powerful country that it is through this economic engine. And what was what was the fuel for that engine, or what was the give the impetus to that engine? It was the stealing
Yes,
of native land and the theft
yes.
of enslaved people's labor.
That's right. That's right. Cotton was a big deal in the South, and it made a whole lot of money from
Mm.
the
Mm-hmm.
slave masters. And
Mm-hmm.
I ran for lieutenant governor, Vicki, in 2010. And when
Wow.
I ran for lieutenant. A lot of people
Uh-huh.
don't remember that.
Uh-huh.
When I ran for lieutenant governor, I ran in the Freedom Party line, and
Right.
I had to campaign all over New York State and Harlem and Manhattan
Wow.
and the
Mm-hmm.
Bronx and Brooklyn and so forth. I ran on the ticket with Charles Barron,
Mm-hmm.
and we ran against Andrew Cuomo and Carl Palladino. It
If
was,
only. Oh, if
I,
only you'd won. That's all. If only.
Well,
Mm.
I'm gonna tell you the success of that. I traveled to Albany when we turned in our petitions, and
Mm-hmm.
we were successful because we were the first Black and Latino-led party that made the ballot for governor in the history of New York State. So I got
Wow.
that claim to fame. But
Wow.
anyway, the reason I'm bringing it up, I had written a lot about the African burial ground in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
and I got a chance to visit the monument, so to speak, to the slaves who helped to build New York City,
Mm-hmm.
because Wall Street, which wasn't far from the African burial ground, was where they bought and sold slaves. So we talk
Awesome.
about Wall Street. The Wall Street was an auction block.
Oh,
It was an
really?
auction.
Wow.
And so people made so the slave owners made a lot of money because of that. Now, they discovered the African burial ground in 1991,
Mm-hmm.
and they were building a new high-rise building in New York City. But as they were building, they kept seeing bones, and they
Oh,
said, "Well,
wow.
where are these bones coming from?"
Mm.
So what happened? They brought in the archaeologists and they brought in the scientists
Mm-hmm.
to study the bones, and they found out that those were the bones of African people who helped to build New York City. And when the Black community found out, and now what happened was the construction company, the builders said, "Well, we're going to keep on building."
Oh,
But the
God.
Black community found out about it, and
Mm.
they raised a ruckus.
Good.
They brought in people, senators and people like that. They had conference. So they made this a historic place so that people, if you go there now, it's beautiful the way they have it designed. And they have the word Sankofa. The word Sankofa. It's a West African term from the Ashanti people, and it means to literally to go back to the past, to fetch it, to bring it back, and to never forget. And so I always point that out. So when I went to that site, I just stood there. I stood there in silence, and I thought about my ancestor who died.
Yes.
Building the city of New York, contributing to the wealth of this nation. So these are the things that we don't know, which is why I write this history.
Right.
I write this history to tell people what's happening. But I speak all over Western New York, Vicki. I not only speak in the city of Buffalo, I have spoken in Cheektowaga, Orchard Park, West Seneca, Tonawanda, because you know what happens when people read my column, and many people read it since it's been in the news. Some people say, well, wow, I didn't know that before. And they realize that it's not only Black people that don't know their history, but white people don't know it either. We all went to the same schools. We all looked at the same textbooks. We didn't get this history. Next week I'm doing a lecture on the original Statue of Liberty was that of a Black woman. I got all this. I'm going to tell you what I told my students one time. Whenever you talk about history, do your research.
Right.
Document what you say. Because somebody is going to ask you a question. How did you know? Where did you get your information? I never speak. I never write. I just wrote a book. I never write anything unless I can document it and give my reference material and tell people, you know what? It's out there. Just open the book. We're so busy on the internet nowadays. See, I don't really use the internet a lot for my research. I do it the old-fashioned way.
Sure.
I dig deep into books that have been long forgotten. And that's how. And I go to the rare book room at the Central Library here in the city of Buffalo. And I find books that were written in the 1700s, the 1800s, the early 1900s, and I dig deep. And that's how I get the information. That's why I'm so tired, Vicki. I spend hours every time I write it. When I wrote that article about Eunice Carter and the first Black prosecutor in New York, it took me 3 hours. 3 hours of research before I wrote a word. Because it's important for people to know this. And I give books. I give books and authors and tell them, this is where you can go and find this information. Because, I have a book that matter of fact, I'm going to talk about it next week. It's called, I had it on here somewhere. What They Never Taught You. That's the name of the book. What They Never Taught You in History Class. That's the name of the book. And that's the basis of my lecture, which I'm going to do next week.
That's your book, that's your new book that we can all buy?
No, that's the name of a book that was written by somebody else.
Well, I want to hear.
I use it.
I want to hear about your book.
I use it as a reference.
I want to hear about your new book.
Yes,
I just does too. We definitely want to know and get some copies. Where we can get copies.
I just published my 12th book. This is my 12th book in October. And the name of the book is Eye on History. It's kind of a long title. I'll read the whole title.
Sure.
Eye on History, The Golden Collection, Articles on African and African American History, Lost History, Forgotten History. That's the title of the book. And in the book, it's on 162 pages of what I call pure African history. It includes, it traces African history from the earliest times in ancient Africa to people and events in America. And the reason it's called the Golden Collection, I chose that myself because every time I found some new information, and all these years I've been writing, every time I find some new information about my people, African Americans, it's like I feel like a miner who has just discovered gold. Just discovered gold. That's why I call it the Golden Collection. And I want to read this part here because it's on the book. It says that this book presents little known information about African and African American history that has been excluded from many textbooks. African people were world travelers. Their presence can be found in ancient China, Germany, Europe, Italy, and Russia. And archaeologists have found evidence that civilization itself began on the continent of Africa. And you know, speaking of Russia, Russia has been in the news. One of the greatest Black Russian poets lived in Russia in the 1700s. His name was Alexander Pushkin.
Oh, sure.
Pushkin. He was a dark-skinned African. There is a statue of him in Moscow. I have a matter of fact, I have a video on his life, and he never denied. He talked about his great-grandfather in his writings. He said, my great-grandfather was an African. So this is something that we don't, and I never will forget. I think it was the Olympics many years ago. And it might have been 219, 220. But at the end, they did a tribute. The Russian people did a tribute of some of their greatest literary giants. And they had a revolving stage. I was sitting in my recliner and I was watching it. And as this stage revolved, I recognized Alexander Pushkin from the research that they had done. And all of the people who were leaders in Russia, they stood up. And one of them who stood up was the president of Russia. I couldn't believe I was seeing that. He stood up with all of the dignitaries in tribute to these people. And one of them was a Black Russian named Alexander Pushkin. Now, if I had not done my research and I had not written about Alexander Pushkin, I could have looked at that television screen and it would not have meant anything to me. Right. I was sitting in my recliner and I sat straight up when I saw this Black Russian being honored by the dignitaries of Russia. Now, the ordinary person, when they watched that, they wouldn't have known what they were watching. I say there are a lot of secrets. There are a lot of secrets in this country when it comes to African people. Right. All over the world, there are a lot of secrets. I wrote a book one time called, because the reason I'm talking about this, not only in my book, but in the 1619 Project, Dr. Hannah Cole, she talks about some of these people. The greatest composer, Ludwig Von Beethoven, had African roots, but we don't acknowledge that. You know, I felt very good after reading her essay, because I went to the Buffalo Public Schools website to see if they were even acknowledging all of this. But they were. They have a section there called the Emancipation Curriculum. I suggest everybody go to that and read it carefully. And it goes from the kindergarten. Each level has their own lessons and so forth, all the way up to high school. And and she mentions in that curriculum, they do deal with the 1619 Project. And I was glad to see that. But they break it down. They break it down according to the grade level. The young people do research, they do writing activities, they do readings, they do poetry, but it is a part of the curriculum of the Buffalo Public Schools. And I commend Dr. Fatima Morrell.
Yes. Yes,
Because
yes.
she is the director. She's the director of that program, and they're doing a wonderful job. So I just wanted to kind of interject that. And, I kind of talked a lot, so.
That's great because, they just adopted that 2019, 2020 within the past 2 years. So it's very recent. And I think that you being a trailblazer, Dr. I've followed your work for many years, and I'm also a homeschooler. And I just feel that, and we've met, before. My husband, Judah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought you were familiar.
Right, right. Oh, she's very familiar. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I have to say this. We have they call it the Emancipation Curriculum now, but I started more than 30 years ago in the original African Infusion Program. The original African Infusion Program, there were 30 of us. There were teachers, scholars, people from the community. Sharon Holly was a part of the group, Karima Ami.
Of course,
and we,
right.
You know what? We laid the foundation.
Right.
We did a lot of research. We did a lot of lessons for teachers and so on. We contributed material because one of the things I found, Deidra, when I was teaching African American history in the school system, there were teachers who wanted to do this, but there were not everybody was in agreement, but there were, for the teachers who wanted to do this, there were two main reasons that problems they had. One was they didn't know how to do it, and they didn't have the correct materials in order.
Right.
One of my favorite books is a book called "You Can't Teach What You Don't Know." That's a good book. Right. I encourage people to read it. I don't care whether you're teaching math or science or social studies or biology. If you don't know your subject matter, you can't teach it.
Of course.
If you don't have the right materials, you can't teach it.
Right.
So I felt that we really laid the foundation. We worked very hard, and we put all this together. So, it's like you're building a house. You have to start with the foundation.
Absolutely.
And so I'm very glad to see that the schools, and it's not perfect. I admit it's not perfect, but they have a good foundation. They are dealing with the 1619 project.
Right.
They encourage our young people to think, to read, to research, to reflect, and to debate these issues, because we're debating these issues in the larger society. So it's okay for our young people to have questions and to ask questions.
Sure.
So on. So I think it's a good thing.
And you brought out a really good point about learning how to research. That is a lost skill. It really is, because even when you have the internet, there's good information and there's bad information. Yes. And knowing how to find information in a book, find it in a encyclopedia, to find it in the index. These kinds of things are lost skills for all of our students. And I really thank you, along with the other mothers of our community, because like you said, you have laid the foundation and continue to lay the foundation for the 1619 curriculum. If you haven't been doing the work done, Sharon Holly, Karima, if y'all haven't been doing that you've been doing, I think it would have been harder for them to accept this now.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah, that's true. Right. I just want to mention, I not only did a lot of my research at the Central Library in the rare book room, and if you borrow any of those books that were written in the 1800s, you do have to make an appointment. You do have to show identification and so on. But I also use the resources of the Buffalo History Museum on Elmwood, right across from Buff State. At the time I was doing the research, it was called the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society. Now it's the Buffalo History Museum, and they have an excellent library. They have a lot of Black history there, but we have to go into these buildings and find out what's there. And so I did a lot of work there, and so I just encourage. We got a lot of young people who might want to write. You know, I have done more than 100 essay contests in Western New York in the past several years.
Yeah,
I do these essay contests all the time.
They're
great. And two main reasons I encourage the young people to expand their writing skills. Writing is a lost art because everybody's on the internet. Everybody wants to do things quickly. Everybody's texting. I sometimes fuss at my grandchildren because they write things and they drop letters and they
Spelling,
and I don't know.
Spelling is the lost art, especially.
Spelling is a lost art. And I said, now write this over so I can read it. But you know, I was an old-fashioned teacher, Vicki. I was an old-fashioned teacher. Every Friday, I had a spelling test. I don't know whether they even do spelling tests anymore, but I did that because I believe very strongly that young people had to learn basic skills. You know, just the whole idea of signing your name. You know, I taught cursive writing. I never will forget whenever I went to the chalkboard. In those days, we call them chalkboards. I don't know, blackboards. I don't know if they still do. And I will go to the board and I would draw those lines across the board. And I would show the children how to write the uppercase, the lowercase. And every time I went to the board, they were all moan and groan because they knew that they were gonna have to write capital A, capital B. They had to do 5 rows each, and they were moaning and groaning. But you know, I meet students today who are adults, who have their own families. I even meet students who have grandchildren. You know what they say to me when I meet them? They thank me.
Of course they do.
Thank you, Mrs. Doyle. I have a lot of students who thank me for the history I taught.
Absolutely.
And they haven't forgotten it.
Of course.
A quick story. I'm going to end this. I got to tell this quick story. I had a student who is now about 42 years old. He sent me an email, and he said, Miss Doyle, I never forgot you were my second grade teacher, and you encouraged me to love science. And today he is in a field of science. He lives in Washington, D.C. He traveled to Buffalo to interview me at the Freedom Wall. And, you know, I'm one of the
wonderful.
And he did a whole video thanking his second grade teacher for teaching him to appreciate science. Second grade.
Wow.
And I was just amazed that he even remembered that.
Well, first of all, you're such a great teacher. So it is clear, even when you start talking about cursive and everything else. So you just have that passion for teaching. But especially, I want to bring it back to history because I want to say that, you know, not only your Eye on History column, your curriculum and you know, and foundation building for the Buffalo Public Schools to teach the real history, and we all need to know it, not just Black students. We all need to know because we have to, back to, you know, understanding our history is critical to understanding where we are today and what we need to do to get where we need to go. So, I'm trying to remember, actually, I've been struggling to remember who I just heard saying this, but that one of the things when it wasn't taught, for the people who weren't lucky enough to be in a school where the real history was being taught, if they were Black students, they may have been, if they were lucky, they were learning it at home, some of the stories, and or in the church, some of the stories. Right?
That's right.
And that's another way, so that, because part of it is just so critical to to back to, as you say, understanding, where we're at and where we need to go. It's
Yeah.
it's the truth telling and black prophetic voice, black prophetic fire. I think of
Yes.
Cornel West. That's one of his
Mhm.
phrases, one of his books, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Vicki, I really admire the Jewish people. I admire them because they always remember their history and they teach their children. They have schools that set up where they teach their children and they teach them within their own religious community. And I always bring that up to African Americans, and you mentioned the church. I think we've lost a lot of interaction with our churches this past couple of years because of the pandemic,
Right.
and the fact that so many churches many of them have closed.
Right.
I'm fortunate. I'm a member of the First Shiloh Baptist Church here in Buffalo.
Wonderful.
My pastor is Reverend Jonathan Stables, and one of the things I really admired about him was we had another member of our church who was a historian, Mr. Tommy Blunt. He would let us every other month. We had a time to come before the church before the sermon, and we gave a Black History presentation. And we've been doing it for the past several years.
Wow.
So this is one way, and some other churches do the same thing. So like you said, the church is very, very important. We just have lost some of that with the fact that people are more doing virtual kinds of things. Right now, our church is temporarily closed, but we still do our virtual activities. We have our prayer meetings and so forth. But every week on our church bulletin, the pastor always does some type of information about African American history. So that keeps us up to date. And you mentioned the home. I know my parents came from the South. They were both born in Alabama, different parts of Alabama. My mother, there was like 12 children. In those days, people had big families.
Right.
12 children in the family, but she wasn't able to go to college because she had to stay on the farm and work and hard to help send the others. But about 8 of those children went to Southern colleges, and they all became educators. They all became teachers. And when I did my family research, I found out that on my mother's side of the family, there were 16 educators and a minister.
Wow.
And so that kind of really inspired me to continue the tradition of education and to, pass it on to my own family as well. And I'm always teaching African American history to my children are adults now. The 3 of them are in their 50s, but my youngest son always says this. He will call me for some other topic, and then I will end up connecting it to Black history. And he'll say, he said, well, now, why is it that every time I call you, we end up with a lecture on Black history?
Right.
Just a natural part of my life.
Right.
It is my life, But I know that he appreciates it, and all of my children do, So I'm glad to have had this opportunity. I think I have really talked too long.
Oh, God,
And,
no. No. We will not let you get by with saying that. That is just not true. No, it's...
Yeah. I want to mention, since you mentioned my book, Vicki, it is available on Amazon.com. You can get it 3 places, Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, or Ex Libris, which is the publishing company.com. And on the 19th of February, I will be at the Top Supermarket at 1275 Jefferson.
Oh, good.
And I will be autographing and selling my book at the Top Supermarket.
What time?
At 1 o'clock, from 1 to 3.
1 to 3.
Now, I'm encouraging people to come and get there at 1 o'clock. These books are going very quickly. Very quickly.
No, we better get there early.
I have a limited number. They come in soft cover and hardcover, which is the $16 for the soft cover, $28 with the hardcover. But I strongly encourage people to get there. Come right at 1 o'clock so
Yes,
you can
that's
get
what
your
I'm
copy.
thinking. Now, so isn't that Zawadi Books too?
Oh yeah, it's at.
Of course.
Oh, they sold out.
Oh, they
They
sold
had it
out.
too.
Oh.
Both times, Sawadi Books is 1382 Jefferson Avenue. They don't have anymore
Oh,
because
okay.
I had two prior book signings. This is my third book signing,
Oh,
and
boy.
I would have had more, Vicki, but the weather has just been awful.
Sure.
The
Oh, you're not
snowstorms.
kidding. Yes, it has.
I couldn't get out of my driveway. So I'm just going to wait till the spring. After I do this at Tops Market, I'll wait till the spring before I have any more book signings
So
because
that's,
we've had
oh, yeah.
a ton of snow.
So that's Saturday the 19th, is it?
Yeah.
Because it's the same week. February, yeah.
February 19th. Saturday, Tops Market, 1275 Jefferson, 1 to 3 p.m.
Because that's the same week that Nikole Hannah-Jones is going to be the distinguished speaker at UB too. On
it's the 16th. She's
right,
going to
she's
speak.
going to be there the 16th. The 16th.
Yeah.
So that's Wednesday evening at 7:30. I'm just letting people know in case people want to see if there's any more seats, which there still were. Quite a few seats, but not huge numbers. When I saw it, I'm not very many seats in toward the front. I'll say that. So it's too late for that.
Yeah.
But
she's there the 16th. Yeah.
But I just think that we see it in so many ways. How much nationally and internationally, really, our history informs our current situation. So all the iniquities that we see in our country, all the racism, all the poverty, all the injustices that we see, and the 1619 Project breaks it down in so many ways. And so do you. So when we look at the history, then we see all those things reflected. So it's very exciting. I'm sure people can find a lot of your other books. Now, those might be at Zawadi, right?
Yeah, well,
I
did.
Older
what?
books?
I'm out of a lot of the other books. I have to have some more
Yes, you do.
printed. But I do have the I Am History book, the Golden Collection. You can get it, as I said, on Amazon. They have plenty of copies there. But it's important for us to know our history, no matter who you are, no matter what cultural background you come from.
Absolutely.
And one of the things, it's important to teach our young people. And I think you had mentioned parents. What I find that a lot of the parents, especially the younger parents, we have a lot of young parents, they don't know the history, so they can't teach their children because they don't know the history themselves. So I believe in workshops. I've done so many workshops at the Meriwether Library over the years, and I had to reduce them because of the pandemic, but now things are kind of opening up again. And so I'm able to do, but I really do most of my work by Zoom. Of course, it didn't work out too well today.
Well, that's all right.
But I'll get back on track. I'll have to get my son over here. He's the computer expert.
Well, you're invited to our Peace Jam a program that will be at Meriwether Library on 3 to 5.
Now, when is that?
Starting March 3rd. So anytime you want to pop in, you want to hang out, anytime you want to come in and just share and teach, it's a human rights and peace education curriculum.
Is that one day? Just one day?
One day out the week for about 12 weeks.
For the Thursday. And, Thursday from 3 to 5, right? Every Thursday, 3 to 5 for about 12 weeks.
Free program, and we learn about Nobel Peace Prize laureates, leadership skills, and they work on a call to action project, for their community. So you are very welcome. I would love for you to stop in, and I'll reach out to you maybe for particular time to come here But we will be there. And, we
Well,
will
you know what, Deidra, I consider that to be my auditorium because it's been renamed in my honor.
Yes, it is your auditorium. That's
It's my
why,
auditorium.
yeah, it's your auditorium. That's why they put your name right on it. Yeah, so.
Yeah, there's a big sign outside the door that says the Dr. Eva M. Doyle Auditorium.
Oh.
I have to thank Senator Tim Kennedy because he led the charge. Mayor Brown, the trustees of these Buffalo and Erie County Library gave permission to rename that auditorium in my name. And you know something? I've been going to libraries ever since I was 10 years old.
Sure.
I used to walk to the library from the Jefferson Projects every Saturday. And I had done so many programs at the Meriwether Library, and I never imagined that one day the auditorium was renamed after me. Because you know what? They don't usually name anything after anybody until they're dead. I hate to say it, until they're dead and gone. But at least I was here.
Right.
I was here to see it.
Right.
That's how we're supposed to do it anyway.
Yes, there's a lot of people that really deserve to have those things happen.
Well deserving, Dr. Doyle.
Well, we're almost out of time. So we're really just have time for last words. And I want to say, usually we talk about what people can do. Well, it's been very plain. We've talked about lots of things people can do, people can learn, and people can share, and lots of opportunities to do that. And a lot of them, you say to be thankful for this and that, and I'm thankful for this and that person. I am more thankful, and we are thankful for you, because you have just done so much for your students being the community, for this community. And I'm going to say I'm so grateful. And so we really, we just can't thank you enough. We hope you can come on again on Talking Peace, or come to Peace Jam, or, maybe we'll do, certainly we'll be following you. I know I'm going to put it on my calendar, the 19th, right?
The 19th at Tops Supermarket.
Right, at Tops from 1 to 3. And so
yes, 1 to 3.
So we're just couldn't be more grateful to you, Dr. Doyle, Mother Eva. You're just so grateful.
But, everybody calls me Mother Doyle, so all over the community. But I would just like to end by saying there's so much that we can learn. Each one teach one.
Right.
When you learn something, share it with somebody. Share it with a family member or a friend, somebody you don't know that well. And once we begin to learn about each other's history and culture, I think we would have less racism in this country. I really do believe that.
Amen. Amen. Alhamdulillah. You're so right.
Yes.
So anyway, thank you so much. This is Talking Peace, and together we've been talking peace in truth and love.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was great.